Defining Point Coaching and Consulting presents Kairos Conversations, Connecting with Quality, the podcast. Kairos is Greek for the right time, the right season, the right opportunity. This podcast features healthcare quality professionals who share their journeys, their advice, their struggles, how they made that transition into a new and exciting role. My heart's desire is that you find this podcast to be inspirational to you as you make your own journey. Don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues and friends and rate us on whichever podcast platform you listen to. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today, I am joined by my next guest, Laura Sauber. Thank you so much for being here, Laura.
Thank you, Brandy. I'm so glad to be here.
Let's start by introducing yourself to the audience.
Well, as you just mentioned, I'm Laura Sauber. I am a consultant. I have my own consulting practice. And what I do is help organizations integrate ethics and compliance into everything that they do. I was a compliance officer for many years in large organizations, and I decided it was time to branch out on my own.
I am so excited for you to share your journey today because I don't think people really understand the difference between quality and compliance and how they intersect. But before we get to that, I want you to share, how did you decide, I want to go into compliance? That's not something that most people say they want to do when they grow up.
Agree. So it was a journey getting to that point where I decided to really specialize and focus my career. I always, since a kid, I thought I wanted to be a doctor, as most people do who go into administration. And I was really heavily influenced to go into healthcare because of my aunt. She was the first female physician assistant in the state of California.
Wow.
And back before HIPAA, or any serious privacy rules, she would allow me to come into the ER and see what she did for work. I would visit periodically at LA County USC General Hospital, the same general hospital back in the day that you would see on the soap opera. So that's what largely influenced me. So I did go off to get my degree in biology, thought I wanted to be a physician, only to realize that that was not the path for me. But what I didn't understand, that there was this whole business side of healthcare. Somebody made that suggestion for me, and I applied for an internship through the American Hospital Association. So that's what actually got me on path. I was placed at Cedars-Sinai, and I decided, hey, I'm going to go to grad school for this. So that's where my career really started. And at that point, I had a very influential mentor who actually was on the board of the program that I was part of. And so he happened to also work at Cedars-Sinai. He reached out to me, and he was so influential on my career and on my mindset, really helping me understand the difference really between working and having a career, and that I could have aspirations for myself that went beyond into leadership roles. So that really was an incredibly important moment in my life. And he had such influence all along my career.
Okay. And so you said you went and got a bachelor, you have a bachelor's in
biology and a master in healthcare administration from USC.
Okay. Interesting enough. I also have a bachelor's in biology, and people don't realize you can't really use it that much.
Yeah, unless I wanted to go into research as one of my friends did.
So one thing I've heard from people, and I've seen it myself, is that when people get like a master's in healthcare administration or even a bachelor's in healthcare administration, they struggle to then get into healthcare administration type roles. So how did you make that jump or that transition into your first role?
So part of it was actually doing a residency. And I actually, because of my aunt, ended up going back to LA County USC to do my residency for my graduate program. So that gave me my initial work experience after having done the internship. I did change organizations a few times early on in my career due to a first marriage and ended up back in California. And it is true that your opportunities often do come through your network. And so I ended up at Kaiser Permanente and was there for 16 years of my career.
Okay. And for people who don't know what healthcare compliance is, what does that mean and what do you do practically in a role like that?
Yeah. So compliance programs are often not necessarily appreciated in an organization. And it's because compliance officers actually have quite a bit of authority. I ended up in the compliance role because where I happened to be working, the region I was working in at Kaiser had gotten their very first compliance officer at the time. And I had the opportunity to work with her and decided that, you know what, the values of the organization are really important. I had experienced some misconduct, and ultimately I realized that I wanted to be part of creating and, helping the organization build integrity every day into what they did. So compliance programs are really a set of processes and systems that help ensure that when there is a compliance issue, or if we're talking about potentially a quality issue that crosses over into a compliance issue, that it actually gets appropriately escalated. And a huge part of a compliance program, people often mostly think about rules and regulations, but a huge part of it is encouraging people to speak up. And I think in that manner, it has a lot in common with patient safety and quality. It's encouraging people to speak up if they see issues, if they have ethical concerns, if they are aware of actual non-compliance, so that the organization can detect it early, ideally prevent it, and if not, resolve it appropriately. The most recently in 2023, the Office of Inspector General came out with new guidance, and it had been a really long time since they had done so for managing a compliance program. And they did identify that quality and patient safety were to be considered a compliance risk that the compliance program needed to incorporate into their planning. Not to own the quality program, but to work collaboratively with the quality program to make sure any potential risks were getting appropriately escalated.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think when people think about compliance, they think about rules and regulations. They think about getting people in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
They think about, Big Brother telling me what to do, but they don't always see how it protects the employee, protects the organization too.
Yeah. There's components of the compliance program that are less obvious because there's so much focus on the compliance part of the ethics and compliance program. And really, it's an infrastructure within the organization that helps to create transparency, helps to promote a culture where people are empowered to use their voice, and also helps to make sure there's the right controls in the organization to be able to maintain compliance. There's a lot of financial pressures in healthcare, and sometimes that can, as you know, can get in the way of focus on the patient and quality and safety.
So I'm curious because, like you said, compliance is a lot like healthcare quality, and a lot of times healthcare quality type roles, like an organization will hire someone to be like a director of quality or in a quality leadership role just to say they have someone in the role, but really they don't want to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you get people in the compliance world not to just check the box? Okay, we have a compliance program. We did what the OIG wanted us to do.
Yeah, it is a challenge. Some organizations, really, that's all they want. They want a paper compliance program similar to a paper quality program rather than living and breathing it. I've been fortunate to be part of organizations that had an authentic ethics and compliance program. But, part of the role is being able to hold steadfast, right, on what is the right thing to do. The compliance officer role is actually one of public service. It is about ensuring that federal funds are appropriately protected. Healthcare is cost effective. There is the quality and patient safety component, which is not really always understood. And I think it's because sometimes we just focus on the weeds of the regulations and we don't step back to really understand what it's bringing to the table strategically.
Right. So if somebody in my audience wants to go into a role like this, what traits or characteristics would make them successful? Like, how would they prepare themselves, or what type of person would be good in a role like this?
Actually, somebody with a quality background would be excellent. Compliance programs often do hire people with clinical backgrounds. It's a great opportunity, and it's a really interesting profession. You're really, the regulations we have to adhere to are not black and white. There's a lot of creative problem solving that you have to do if you want to be a compliance program that enables the organization to do the right thing versus a compliance program that just says no to everything.
Yeah, so that's the opposite side of it, right? No, we
Right.
can't do this. No, we can't do that. Why? Because the policy says, because
Right.
somebody rule said this, right?
Yeah.
So what advice would you give someone else?
So I would say, I've worked with operators that either push compliance away or integrate the program in. When you're trying to ensure that you build an operation or a business unit that is sustainably compliant and is building in controls and is also most importantly about doing the right thing, welcome your compliance department in. Again, I know people can be afraid they're just going to say no. I definitely have seen that. But for those leaders that bring in compliance proactively, it's often a really wonderful collaboration and ends up being the organization ends up being better for it.
Yeah.
The biggest mistake I see clinicians make when transitioning away from direct patient care is applying for every available role. Problem is, it's like throwing darts at a board, hoping something sticks. And let's be real, employers can sniff this out like a canine, and it makes the candidate come off as unfocused. The solution, my friend? Do some deep introspective work to identify your passions, skills, and strengths, and find roles that align with that. That's why I've partnered with Career Clinic, who created the healthcare career profile that I wish I had created first. It's called Stream Ahead, and it takes about 10 minutes to complete. It is time well spent to get detailed report of the top work streams that fit who you are. I'll link the assessment in the show notes section of this podcast. And you can use the code BRANDY10, that's BRANDY10 for 10% off. Now let's get back to today's episode.
So working in healthcare compliance and having the years of experience that you do, and I'm sure you've seen a lot, you've been fortunate to work in some very great organizations. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what do you think would make healthcare safer for our patients and more sustainable for our colleagues?
Yeah, a lot of it gets to culture. So one of the biggest ways that non-compliance happens is silos. Silos are very much a barrier to being compliant because you have to look at processes end to end. And so the more that an organization teams, I'm a really big fan of Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School, and she writes a lot about psychological safety as well as has a book called Teaming. And it is that teaming and bringing together those diverse cross-functional skill sets and perspectives that is really critical to doing the right thing. the issues in healthcare are so complex today, as you know, and not just in healthcare, really the problems that we have to solve are so complex. We can't do it alone. We have to bring in that diverse perspective. And often there are solutions. So, effective solutions that you can have that don't have to necessarily feel burdensome to be able to be compliant. I've actually seen regulators require corrective actions of organizations that actually improved the operations and really made sure that it was much more focused on, if it's a health plan, the member, or if it's a care delivery, the patient. And so it's just part of what we have to embrace because healthcare is so regulated.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it so tough for the clinician, is because it's so regulated. A lot of my colleagues feel that it's hard to do what we really want to do for the patient. It's hard to really care for the patient in the way that we want to care for the patient, because somebody is telling us we have to check this box and make sure we document this and make sure we do this. And sometimes we don't always see the bigger picture of why this rule or why this is a compliance issue, and what patient safety event happened that led to this being a thing we had to do.
Exactly. And that's the difference between a rules-based compliance program and a values-based one, or a principles-based compliance program, which is, people don't need to become lawyers to learn how to be compliant, right? They just need to understand the core principles that they can follow, or at least will trigger them to go pull up that policy to make sure they're doing it the right way.
And I'm glad you said that, Laura, because I think a lot of people think that in order to go into healthcare compliance, you have to have your JD, your Juris Doctorate, or be someone like that where you know all this legalese.
It's not necessary. There's great compliance officers who are lawyers, and there's great compliance officers who aren't. And I think it's gets back to, it's really about managing those processes and helping to promote that culture where people raise concerns, so you can catch things early, and where you work collaboratively with operations to make sure you have the right controls in place. You need legal at the table, and that's where that cross-functional piece comes in, working across legal, operations, quality, IT, because all of it's interconnected.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It goes back to what you said about silos, right? Not working in silos.
That's right.
And so a lot of my audience are clinicians, but some of them are further along in their career and maybe in executive type roles that may have or may want some quality or compliance type advice or consulting. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the work that you do with your consulting firm.
Sure. I just started. I just launched it this year. I decided that starting my own business was part of my journey of learning to use my own voice. And so I help organizations build and mature their compliance program. I can come in and help them understand what are their compliance risks, and then what should we take as the next steps. I also have been focused on women's health organizations. My first client was one. I'm a big fan of all the women out there trying to close gaps in women's healthcare. And so I really want to help founders be successful in terms of navigating the complexity of the regulatory environment, both federal and state.
So are most of your clients on the startup side, or are you working with these established big name healthcare organizations?
I'm working right now with a specialty medical group. And I have also worked with a startup. And I think for a while it's going to vary. But if I had to describe my ideal client, it would likely be an organization that maybe is a little further along, so that I can help them. They can invest a little resource into getting their compliance program started. But my recommendation is that organizations start that early. If you're receiving Medicare or Medicaid, it is mandated to have a compliance program. It's highly recommended. I highly recommend, even if you're just receiving commercial, you have a compliance program, because the payers are also looking at similar types of issues from a revenue cycle standpoint as the federal regulators.
So are you a consultant in the sense of you create a strategy, you guide, you give advice, you help them to start their program, or do you become a fractional leader where you become that compliance officer for them until they hire somebody else?
That is an option. I can work either way.
Okay. So you can do either bring me in on a project basis or let me be your person and get your program up and running and actually operationalize it too.
Yes. Or I can just work on a retained basis where I'm providing ongoing advice.
Okay. How would someone work with you? How would they get in touch with you?
So they can reach out to me via my website at sauberconsulting.com. I can also, my email address is Laura, Laura, at Sauber, Sauber, consulting.com. And so they can reach me either way.
Awesome. Well, before we end the podcast episode, I want you to share like some thoughts that you want to leave with the audience.
You know, I think it's important in order to know that as an organization, you're doing the right thing by having clarity. If I could share just a brief story, which is I had a former colleague put on a Tai Chi session, and I actually shared this on LinkedIn once. And so a bunch of people arrived at this session on a Saturday in Pasadena, and the room was really quiet. Nobody was talking. And then the teacher started giving instruction, where to stand, where to be in the class, and what we were going to do. Suddenly, the noise level rose in the room. People were now having lots of conversation. And he stopped us and he said, "Inform, there is freedom." If people aren't clear on how to get it done the right way, it's probably not the greatest environment. It's important for people's comfort, for their confidence, to have those guiding principles by which to operate by. And you can either look at your compliance program as a cost center, or you can find ways to use it as an asset. And I do think it's an underutilized asset.
Wow, that's really good. So essentially, if you don't say anything, then people are going to be silent and not do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to give them a structure in order to make it work.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really good. I'm glad you shared that. That's really, really good. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time to share with my audience. I hope people can really grasp the interconnection between quality and compliance and how, it all works together to keep our patients safe and to keep our team members safe. So I really appreciate you being here, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, Brandy.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. It would mean a lot if you would share this episode with a friend or a colleague. I would be honored to encourage them in their journey too.